For more than 300 years, there was one empire that pretty much dominated the entire globe. It was the very first power where the sun literally never set. A massive, colossal force that redrew the map of the world and, yeah, changed history forever. We're talking, of course, about the Spanish Empire.
And that's really the big question, isn't it? How on earth did a relatively small nation, kind of tucked away on the edge of Europe, manage to build the world's first global superpower, only to watch it all fall apart? That's the huge, epic story of rise and fall we're going to get into today.
All right, so this timeline here is basically our roadmap. It all kicks off in 1492 with a discovery that changed, well, everything. That discovery sparks this brutal age of conquest, which leads to the empire hitting its absolute peak around 1650. But then, fast forward just over 100 years, and you start to see the first major cracks appearing. So let's jump in right at the beginning. So where'd this all come from? Well, it all boils down to one thing: ambition. See, back in the late 1400s, Europe was in this crazy, fierce race for new trade routes, new riches, and more power. And Spain, they weren't just in it to compete. Oh no, they were in it to win. And look, this wasn't just some friendly exploration trip. This was a high-stakes, all-or-nothing dash across the Atlantic. The Spanish crown and the conquistadors they funded, they were driven by that famous promise of gold, God, and glory. They weren't out there just to see new lands. They were there to claim them for what would become a massive empire. But that ambition, it had a really dark side. And that's where we have to turn now, to the brutal, violent reality of how this empire was actually built. It's what some historians call the worst side of imperial expansion, the conquests. Okay, take a look at this, because the imbalance here is just staggering. On one side, you've got the Aztec Empire. We're talking a massive, advanced civilization with millions of people. And on the other side, you have Hernan Cortez with maybe 500 soldiers. So you have to ask, how in the world did that work? Well, the key thing to remember is it wasn't just about the numbers. The Spanish had weapons the Aztecs had never even seen before: steel armor, guns, horses. But, and this is maybe the most crucial part, they were smart. They exploited local rivalries, teaming up with other indigenous groups who were tired of being under Aztec rule. And the results of all that? A collapse that was just shockingly fast. And you know what? The same basic pattern: disease, better tech, and clever alliances. It happened all over again with the Inca Empire. So in just a few decades, you have two of the most powerful, most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas just gone, toppled. Their entire worlds were turned upside down, and they became the foundation for what was called New Spain. So Spain now has this enormous new territory. The big question is, how do you manage it all? And more importantly, how do you get all that wealth out of it? The answer? Well, it's a brutal economic engine, one that ran on an unbelievable amount of human suffering. And a massive piece of that engine was the transatlantic slave trade. I mean, this was a truly horrific system. We're talking about the enslavement of millions of African men, women, and children who were then forced onto ships, transported across the ocean, and sold into just brutal labor in the mines and on the plantations in the Americas. Just let this number sink in for a second. Over 3 million. That is the estimated number of enslaved people brought to the Spanish Americas alone. That's a huge chunk of the entire transatlantic trade. Think about that. 3 million individual human lives stolen just to generate wealth for an empire. The scale is almost impossible to comprehend. And this chart really shows you exactly where all that stolen labor went. Just look, the vast majority of the empire's wealth, we're talking over half of it, came directly from mining silver and gold. Then you have another huge chunk from sugar and other big agricultural products. And here's the kicker. Both of those industries, mining and plantations, were almost entirely dependent on the forced labor of indigenous people and enslaved Africans. But here's the thing. An empire that's built on just taking resources and is constantly at war to keep control, well, that can't last forever. It just can't. And eventually, all that pressure created cracks in the foundation, which brings us to the final chapter of this story, the inevitable decline. So what exactly went wrong? It wasn't just one thing. It was more like a fatal chain reaction. First up, endless wars. Spain basically became the policeman of Europe, and that meant fighting incredibly expensive wars that drained their money faster than they could ship the silver in. Second, that silver, it actually turned into a curse. All this gold and silver flooded the market in Europe and caused massive inflation, which just wrecked Spain's economy at home. And third, while all this was happening,
Spain's rivals, like Britain and France, they were getting stronger. They were building bigger navies, better economies, and they were ready to challenge Spain for the top spot.
You've probably heard that famous quote, right? The one from Spain's King Philip II, "The sun never sets on my empire." It perfectly captures the pride, maybe even the arrogance, and just the unbelievable scale of the empire when it was at its peak. I mean, it stretched all the way from the Americas to the Philippines. But that size, that also became its greatest weakness. It was just too big, too complicated, and way too expensive to hold together forever.
And then you start to see these undeniable signs that things are falling apart. In 1762, right in the middle of the 7 Years' War, Spain lost two super strategic territories, Havana in Cuba and Florida. And who did they lose them to? Their biggest rival, Great Britain. It was a humiliating defeat, and it was basically a giant neon sign to the rest of the world that the Spanish Empire wasn't so invincible after all.
So, all of this brings us to one last really important question. The Spanish Empire, as a political power, it's gone. But its legacy? Oh, it's absolutely everywhere. You see it in the Spanish language, spoken by 500 million people today. You see it in the very borders of the countries on our maps. And you see it in the deep, painful inequalities that can be traced all the way back to those colonial times. It's a powerful reminder that empires don't just vanish into thin air. They leave behind a complex and often very painful inheritance. So it really makes you think, when an empire finally falls, what is actually left in its wake?